Welcome. This week I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the election, which is what the second week is leading up to. So the way the exercises take place in the actual giving and the receiving of the retreat experience is more important than the intellectual experience alone. Hence, there are times when in the lectures that I ask you to pause and actually engage with the text, but also savour the fruits of these reflections. And so at least we get a little insight, a little taste of the exercises which are the focus of our study. So the wealth of the exercises, as many of you are aware, is only revealed in and through what you undergo, what you experience when you make them. The application of senses, the meditations, the contemplations, the repetitions, the daily examine are all examples of the many prayer forms on offer through the exercises, and they're the many prayer forms that we can adopt in our own day-to-day practice, well beyond the exercises. Now, silence too plays a key role in this form of prayer. Remember, Ignatius experienced the value of solitude and silence in his cave at Manresa. And if you have an opportunity to go to Manresa and to visit it, it's well worth the visit. And in the distance you can see Montserrat, which he would have seen daily as he sat there meditating in his cave. But he had solitude, he had quiet, he had silence. And even when you go in there, even if there's other people there, people are very respectful of the silence there. It's a prayerful place, it's a sacred place. So remaining focused on what is on offer each week and not neglecting any of the exercises that are set down for those who make the exercises in those moments is really important to the overall experience and also the benefits of this prayer form. So this is a vehicle for understanding what you are living. And freedom is key. All must be done in freedom. All must be done without haste. Remember that I said these men were trained in the university, they were methodical men, they were reflective men, and this lends itself naturally then to benefiting from the fruits of this prayerful experience. To see the layers of significance on offer by Ignatius, it's important then not to move with haste. Do not move with haste through the exercises, and hopefully this week we won't be moving with haste through week 6, but rather taking our time, reflecting back on what's come in the last 5 weeks of this unit, looking forward to what is to come in the rest of the unit, and savouring the little opportunities that we get along the way when we examine those little morsels that help us deepen our own understanding of our identity, our vocation, and our mission. Now, in all of this, what the exercises are leading up to is the election. It's leading up to the courage to choose. But the courage to choose comes second, because choice always involves freedom. That ability to be indifferent, as Ignatius calls it, so as not to be drawn to one thing over another, to one choice over another, so that we may choose that which draws us closer to Jesus, draws us closer to Christ, and in so doing draws us closer to our true self, our authentic self. We struggle, each and every one of us, to act in a way that is congruent with our authentic selves. This struggle is not something that only you or I feel. It's a struggle that everybody goes through, that everyone feels. It's probably a struggle that stays with us for the rest of our lives. Now, you would have listened to this poem before, and you would have perhaps reflected deeply on it, but in the light of an election, I'd like to revisit now Bonhoeffer's poem, which he writes in prison, where he's reflecting on his authentic self and wondering if he really is the man who others see? Is the man that others see his true self? And he poses the question to himself, a question that you and I also ask each other, and that is, who am I?
Who am I? They often tell me. I step from my cell's confinement, calmly, cheerfully, firmly, like a squire from his country house. Who am I? They often tell me. I used to speak to my warders, freely and friendly and clearly, as though it were mine to command. Who am I? They also tell me. I bore the days of misfortune, equably, smilingly, proudly, like one that is accustomed to win. Am I then really that which other men tell of? Or am I only what I myself know of myself? Restless and longing and sick, like a bird in a cage, struggling for breath, as though hands were compressing my throat, yearning for colors, for flowers, for the voice of birds, thirsting for words of kindness, for neighborliness, tossing in expectations of great events, powerlessly trembling for friends at an infinite distance, weary and empty at praying, at thinking, at making, faint and ready to say farewell to all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? A hypocrite before others, and before myself, a contemptible, woebegone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army, fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine.
So, who am I? One of the great treasures of the exercises, and I believe that has contributed not only to their contemporary popularity, but their popularity over almost 5 centuries, is that they provide us with a pathway to that discovery of our true selves, of our authentic selves. Now, choice also, and I know I'm going outside of the tradition in this lecture somewhat, but I think it helps us to shine a light on Ignatius and the spiritual exercises through other writings and through other experiences. So choice is a theme in Viktor Frankl's now classic text, Man's Search for Meaning. And what he discovers is in the concentration camp, where everything is taken away, where men and women are stripped of all of their humanity, he discovers what he calls the last of human freedoms, that everything can be taken away except for this. And he says, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And there were always choices to make. Every day, every hour, offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom. But in order to choose, we know, we who have immersed ourselves in the Ignatian tradition, that in order to choose, one must have the skills to discern what is congruent with our name of grace. Frankl continues, the way in which a man accepts his fate and all the suffering it entails, the way in which he takes up his cross, gives him ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, to add a deeper meaning to his life. It may remain brave, dignified, and unselfish, or in the bitter fight for self-preservation, he may forget his human dignity and become no more than an animal. Here lies the chance for a man either to make use of or to forego the opportunities of attaining the values that a difficult situation may afford him. There is obviously something much deeper than one's circumstances that shapes our lives. Frankl goes on to say, man's inner strength may raise him above his outward fate. And really, our inner strength, our inner awareness, our self-awareness raises us above our fate and helps us to play a significant part in the social transformation. It's this aspect of Ignatian spirituality that really holds the power to contribute to the common good. It's this aspect of Ignatian spirituality upon which Ignatian education flows, and the framework of education that's practiced in Jesuit schools and universities. So, in Bonhoeffer's cell, in his solitude, in the silence of being alone with himself, questions arose within him as to his real identity, his real vocation, his real mission, his real self. His discernment had revealed to him his mission had led him to the cell, and now in his cell he's encouraged to reflect more deeply, more so than he'd ever had before, on who he is. He's really struggling here with his name of grace, and even in his solitude, in solitary confinement in his prison cell, he is confronted with choice. Discernment emerges from the questions that arise within you during the process of the exercises. Discernment emerges from the questions that Bonhoeffer asked. Discernment emerged from the questions that Viktor Frankl asked in the concentration camp. So one of the powers of the exercises is their rhythm. They are tailored in such a way that there are as many ways of making them, as many as the individuals that choose to make them. And I know we've visited this before, but I'm going to, again, let us reflect on annotation 15 and the wisdom of Ignatius in this. The one giving the exercises ought not to move the one receiving them more to poverty or to any particular promise than to their contraries, nor to one state of life more than to another. Outside the exercises, it can indeed be lawful and meritorious for us to move all who seem suitable to choose continence, virginity, religious life, and every form of evangelical perfection. But during these spiritual exercises, it is more opportune and much better that the Creator and Lord communicate himself to the faithful soul in search for the will of God, as he inflames her in his love and praise, disposing her towards the way in which she will be better able to serve him in the future. Hence the giver of the exercises should not be swayed or show a preference for one side rather than the other, but remaining in the middle, like a pointer of a balance, should leave the Creator to work directly with the creature, and the creature with the Creator and Lord. I think this is what Bonhoeffer was discovering in his cell, that God, rather than those who were talking about him, rather than the people around him, or their impressions of him, it was God himself. Now, drawing out, revealing to Bonhoeffer his name of grace, revealing to Viktor Frankl his name of grace. Grace always draws you towards God. The exercises create a culture in which discernment can occur. The maker is given the space and the time to intuit the movements of grace within. Ignatius found himself pondering on a recurring question, and it's that question that he gives to us. What have I done for Christ? What am I doing for Christ? What can I do for Christ? Christ is presented by Ignatius as the discerner par excellence. The second week presents the key decision-making moments in Christ's life, and they've been carefully selected for this purpose. Discernment is part of the gospel contemplation. There are two sets of rules for discernment. They are reflections given in two different contexts in the first week of the exercises, and I ask that you perhaps pause now and go and refamiliarise yourself with those rules of discernment, and perhaps if you'd like to make a comment in the student forum about what insights you've gained or what strikes you with those rules. So the lead up is to the election, and what are we choosing? What is the choice? The choice is, or the choice that Ignatius puts before us, is how will I follow Jesus authentically? This is the Ignatian election. Howard Gray says that an election is, quote, a decision made in the light of an ultimate relationship touching all the relationships of my life. I make a choice in knowledge, and that this is the choice to do or be what God is asking me to do or be. This election, this choice will affect everything else I say and do in my life. It will be a powerful response that will have a lasting and all-encompassing impact on me and on all I relate to. This election must arise from within the exercitant. It is not to be suggested or engineered by the giver. And of course, we're always confronted with a tension between our longing and a tension between temptation. We are always confronted with the temptation to create, to manufacture the God we long for. Often what we struggle to do or try to do is to create God in our own image, rather than trying to understand the mystery of ourselves made in God's image. Therefore, it is imperative that we discern what is true within us. St. Paul directs the Thessalonians in this manner. And in turn, St. Paul also has a word of advice for us on discernment. And I quote, "Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. Do not quench the Spirit. Do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test everything and retain what is good. Reject every kind of evil. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. So you honour the experience, you test the experience, and you look for that experience to give you guidance." So there is nothing new in what Ignatius is saying about the Christian tradition. He's adding to that tradition, he's perhaps enhancing that tradition, but he's reflecting the tradition and broadening our understanding of it. So let's turn to the election. And here I'd like you to pause the lecture and to take up the Times of Ignatian election article and share your reflections in the student forum. There's some lovely quotes in that article, and also it gives you an idea of the development of this whole sense of election and the times and the conditions in which it should be made. Polanco, one of Ignatius's wingmen, as I call him, the secretary to the society, and I think to 3 generals. There's a quote from him in that, "To obtain God's gifts, 3 things are necessary: a generous spirit, the appropriate means or tools," which I think the exercises provides us, but also it requires our cooperation, and we can only do that in freedom. So perhaps on the forum, if you can reflect on the issues that are raised in that article about the times and about the conditions, and those of you who are practitioners, who are givers of the exercises, it'd be great if you could share your own experience by way of your own directory, your own advice that you've gleaned from the practice of giving the exercises. That would be a great fruit for this study, and thank you for your generosity in sharing that. So the prayer methods used by Ignatius have been the focus of those wishing to identify the distinguishing features, and I think we need to make some comment here on that because they are features of Ignatian spirituality that flows out of the charism. But we can, and I think the Sampier article also warns us not to become too dogmatic. The methods alone do not constitute Ignatian spirituality, and I think anyone who studies the Christian tradition and the contemplative tradition realises that there was nothing unique in these methods. It was just simply the way Ignatius packaged them or used them or utilised them. The exercises themselves are a method of prayer, and they're a method of prayer designed towards drawing us to spiritual growth. And the use of techniques applied during the exercises, like today, are just so familiar to us in the Catholic tradition, but the way Ignatius organised them was very radical, very new and very novel in his day. And having said that, as I said, the way he packaged them was unique, but the methods themselves were not unique. Just some examples. He was not the first to propose mental prayer, for example. Many prayer methods can be traced to others in our tradition, and they were in popular use in the time of Ignatius, which is why he trialled them and he's included them in there. He's also, when he was giving the exercises, he realised that some methods work for some and some methods work better for others. Just a little bit of history surrounding some of the contemplative practices. In the 12th century, William of Paris taught the composition of mental prayer. Prayer, according to the 3 faculties, memory, intellect and will, is contained in Bonaventure's, it's called the Triple Way. And in Raymond Lull's The Art of Contemplation. So imaginative prayer on the life of Christ was taught by Alred of Rivaux and is fully explained in the Meditations on the Life of Christ, which has been attributed to St. Bonaventure. And we got those prayer methods through something very familiar, through Ludolf's text, and that's where Ignatius would have come across them, and also he would have seen that these techniques were advocated in this text. And he would have probably started trialling them from his bed, his convalescence bed, and then he's taken them and become an expert practitioner, and then knows how to convey them to others so that others can use the techniques, but also perhaps as a director when to advise an exercitant to practice them, and perhaps when not. So what he did, he took the methods, he perfected them, but he made them also accessible to the ordinary man and woman. And he did that by simplifying them, but also offering a wide variety so that the exercises become a relevant text and a text that anyone can enter into. The one method that is unique to Ignatius, and as I said, is the actual exercises themselves. This crafting of this experience is what constitutes an Ignatian method. So Ignatius knew that he couldn't be the only one who guides people through the exercises, and that his mission was far bigger than himself. So he needed companions around him. And when we look at what he looked for in those he invited to be Jesuits, we can see there the individual dispositions that we ourselves need to develop in order that we may become good givers of the exercises or good companions to those on a spiritual journey. So who did Ignatius seek? He sought men who exhibited a strong sense of their own identities. So the discovery of your authentic self is really important to Ignatius. To be self-aware, to be a deep thinker, to be reflective, but also to be a personable person, someone who can relate to others. That was the only way he was going to get recruits, if people were attractive to the personalities of the companions. They needed to be able to relate to others. They needed to be good listeners. They needed to engage with people. They needed to care. They needed to show empathy. His spirituality, while inspired, is also a product of his day. Ignatius opposed some of the movements in those times, and you can look these up, the movement of Erasmus and also evangelism. So it's not surprising that in his spirituality, it contains elements as defences towards the contemporary movements that threatened the church and threatened Catholic spirituality. But in no way did Ignatius intend his methods to be practiced without reason and without faith. I think it's a mistake today to think you can just simply take the exercises and completely disconnect them from the Christian tradition. They are a product of that tradition, and they only have meaning and strength within that tradition. So the methods of Ignatius are always to be subordinated then to the inspirations of grace. And that'll be revealed in the exercitant. They will feel drawn to one thing more than another. They'll feel more consolation from one method more than another. And this is why the exercises require an experienced and deeply spiritual director or guide. You can't give what you don't have. In order to help others and guide others, we too must be daily practitioners, and we must be constantly striving to understand ourselves, to be self-aware of our limitations as well as our strengths, so that we do not get in the way of our companioning someone through the exercises. So there's no rigid system in Ignatius's spiritual exercises. Yes, they are a disciplined approach, but that discipline should lead one to freedom, not to confinement, not to feeling desolation. The consolation comes in and through the freedom. So does the fruit, so is grace revealed. So what was Ignatius like as a director? And we have a little insight here from John Haler. So Haler was guided on a retreat by Ignatius in Venice. And on the retreat, Ignatius said to Haler, you need to devote 1 hour each day to prayer. And that prayer is to be broken into 2 parts, prayer and contemplation. Now the subject of your contemplation should be the mysteries of Christ. He also counselled Haler to learn the 3 methods of prayer and directed him never to omit the colloquies at the end of the contemplation. The Jesuits, and Ignatius wrote the constitutions, he was very directive. He had these directives for scholastics. In the constitutions, you can see Ignatius assumed that scholastics would not use a singular method, but a variety of methods as prescribed in the exercises over the course of 1 hour per day. Ignatius, interestingly, does not give any directives for Jesuits in their post-formation period. Rather, he draws attention to traits or characteristics. Self-sacrifice and attentiveness is what the Jesuit needs to practice in their day-to-day activities. So he urges them to find God in all things, to unite themselves to God. And this is just taken for granted in a daily disposition. So if we could delve into the constitutions, we don't have time here. Perhaps that's a subject for another unit, looking at the texts that Ignatius actually crafted himself. The exercises, the constitutions are both worthy of study and are important studies to reveal the mind of Ignatius and his genius as a spiritual director. So the dependence is rather on an intelligent use or a selective use of the methods, not the methods themselves. So this variety is essential in Ignatian spirituality. So in all apostolic works and also in prayer, the primary importance is always given to those movements of grace, not to the methods of prayer prescribed. The methods of prayer are a means, not an end in themselves. The techniques are not the spirituality. They are to be used in order to move towards unity with God. No human effort that is useful in this purpose should be neglected. So if something helps you pray, or something helps you exercise and pray, and it's not listed by Ignatius, it doesn't mean it's not a valid method for a director to guide someone in during the exercises. Ignatius wanted us to use all things at our disposal so that we may better love, reverence and serve God. So any technique, any prayer form, any method, any disposition, if it moves us to better love, to better reverence, and to better serve God, then it is valid and should be included in Ignatian spirituality. So in the constitutions, Ignatius's first dependence is on the interior spiritual life to preserve the order. And if you do want to read these constitutions, there's lots of online copies. There's the Ignatius's original copy, there's a commentary copy, and I encourage you, if you're interested in deepening your knowledge of Ignatian spirituality or looking at it further, the constitutions which Ignatius wrote are really a valid text for deep reflection and study, and reveal more of the mind of the saint. So Ignatius's first dependence is always on the interior spiritual life to preserve the order. And we saw Borgia's letter picking up that theme. His third general doesn't lose that thread. That thread comes directly from the founder. Second, he prescribed practices, and he also cautions, though, that those practices must be used to ensure the interior life is strengthened, not weakened. So for the individual, as well as for the society of Jesus as a whole, the move towards union with the divine, in order to achieve this union, to experience this union, a person should not be lazy or neglect the methods that assist you to become attentive and responsive to the movements of grace within. So for Ignatius, again, I stress this again, the methods are means. They are to be employed in the measure to which they aid the soul to move towards its purpose. What is its purpose? Identity, vocation, mission, revealing the person's name of grace, their true identity. These methods are characteristic of Ignatian spirituality only insofar that they achieve that goal, that they aid the soul, that they aid the soul's determination to better serve God. And that's what Ignatius comes back to time and time again. That's what the early Jesuits come back to time and time again. And if you read the letters of the generals, this is the movement always. Go back to helping souls, which is how Ignatius originally expressed it. The mission of the society is to help souls. And we see in Ignatian spirituality, and if this is absent, it's certainly not Ignatian spirituality, is this passionate love for Jesus and desire for spiritual reason. So love and reason. All of Ignatius's biographers highlight two key traits in the man himself. One is mystical contemplation, and the other is his calm reasoning. The key to his spirituality was enthusiasm and reasoning, always towards service and service in love. So for Ignatius, apostolic service of Christ in union with Christ in order to enhance the common good is central. This is what distinguishes it from other charisms raised up by the Spirit in the Church. It's this apostolic service. Ignatian spirituality is deeply rooted in the Gospel and the New Testament, but it's always embedded in the secular world. It's never in retreat, it's always advancing out into the world. Ignatius's mysticism is service through love, and this theme is present in all of his writings. Ignatius was a man who was very docile to grace. He employed all of his capacities to ensure always that his intellect, his reason, was always enlightened by faith. And Ignatius really brings this new emphasis to the spiritual history, the spiritual tradition of the Church, in order to fulfill God's will. So for Ignatius, especially, as we've seen, he focuses on what is God asking of each of us in his service. So he joins these two ideas together. He joins service and conformity to God's will. And this is something that we should not neglect and that we perhaps need to reflect upon more deeply. The essence of service and conformity to God's will. So today we've looked at really some of the elements of making an election, and really that depends upon discernment. And I know some of you have done an entire unit on discernment, and perhaps that would be good to share your knowledge gleaned from that unit with the other students. That would be very helpful for us to engage in a conversation in this session. So as I said, we need the courage to choose. But first, this requires the freedom to choose.
Who
the
am
ability
I?
to be indifferent,
They
not to be
often tell
drawn
me.
to one thing over
I
another,
step from
but
my
rather
cell's
to
confinement,
allow the Spirit of God
calmly,
to reveal to
cheerfully,
us the better course. And the
firmly,
better course is the one
like
that
a
leads us
squire
closer
from his
to
country
Jesus.
house.
I'd like to conclude this
Who am
section
I?
of the
They often
unit
tell
and
me.
the lecture by
I
once
used to
again
speak
reflecting
to
on
my warders
Bonhoeffer's
freely
Who Am
and
I?
friendly
poem.
and
And perhaps
clearly,
over this week
as
you'd
though
like to
it
use
were mine to
this for your
command.
own spiritual reading.
Who am
This
I?
audio file.
They
And
also
reflect
tell me.
deeply
I
on
bore the
Bonhoeffer's
days of
questions and how they
misfortune,
reflect the questions
equably,
in your own life.
smilingly,
So we'll conclude by
proudly,
listening again
like
to
one
Bonhoeffer.
that is accustomed to win. Am I then really that which other men tell of?
Who am I? They
Or am
often
I
tell
only
me.
what I myself
I
know
step from myself
of myself,
calmly,
restless
cheerfully,
and longing
firmly,
and sick,
like
a bird
from
in a
his country
cage,
house.
struggling for breath,
Who am I?
as though hands were
They
compressing my
often tell
throat,
me. I used to
yearning for
speak to
colors,
my warders,
for flowers, for the
and
voice of
friendly,
birds,
and clearly,
thirsting
as
for
though
words
it were
of
mine to
kindness, for
command.
neighborliness,
Who am I?
tossing in
They often
expectations
tell me.
of great
I
events,
bore the days of misfortune,
powerlessly trembling for
equably,
friends at an
smilingly,
infinite distance,
proudly,
weary
like one
and empty
that is
at
accustomed
praying,
to win.
at thinking, at making,
Am I then
faint and
really
ready to say
that
farewell
which other
to
men
all.
tell of? Or am I only what I myself
Who
know
am I?
of myself?
This or the other?
Restless
Am I
and
one
longing
person today
and sick,
and tomorrow
like a
another?
bird in a cage,
Am I both
struggling
at
for
once?
breath, as though hands
A
were
hypocrite
compressing
before
my throat,
others, and before
yearning for
myself,
colors,
a contemptible,
for
woebegone
flowers,
weakling?
for the voice of birds,
Or is something within me
thirsting for
still
words
like a
of
beaten
kindness,
army,
for
fleeing
neighborliness,
in disorder
tossing
from
in
victory
expectations
already
of great
achieved?
events, powerlessly
Who am
trembling
I?
for friends
They mock
at an
me,
infinite distance,
these lonely questions of
weary
mine.
and empty,
Whoever
at
I
praying,
am,
at
thou
thinking,
knowest, O God,
at making,
I
faint
am thine.
and ready to say farewell to all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? A hypocrite before others, and before myself, a contemptible, woebegone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army, fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine.
So whoever we are, one thing we know for sure, we are God's. There's a couple of readings in the activities this week that I draw your attention to, and you can take them over the week to reflect on, and anything that inspires you or moves you to share with others, any questions that arise from it, to place them on the forum so we have a chance to engage. And so for now, I leave you with the reflection to ponder, who am I?